Hello and welcome back to the Consistory of the coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Jake Zabel of the St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. And this is my lecture series, What It Means to Be a Lutheran. And we're finally up to Article 1 of the Formula of Concord on original sin. So the main issue dealt with in the Formula of Concord here is the issue between the Philippists, particularly Victorinus Strigel, and the Ignacio Lutheran Matthias Flacius Aristarchus, who debated in the synergistic controversy regarding original sin and the human will. The two men had adopted the language of Aristotle regarding accidents and substance. So to explain this as simple as I can, the substance refers to the essence of a thing, whereas the accidents are the makeup of something. The formula defines a substance as that which exists in and of itself, and an accident as that which does not exist in and of itself, but exists in relation to something else and cannot exist by itself. Basically, to explain this as simple as I can, consider a chair. It could be made of wood, metal, or plastic, and these materials would be the accidents. Whereas the concept of a chair would be the substance. The chairness is its substance. So, for example, whether it's made of wood, metal, or plastic, a chair is still a chair. So the accidents can change, but the substance remains the same. They're all chairs. But then if you have something like a chair, a table, and a cupboard, they could all be made out of wood, but they're all different things. So they could all share the same accident of wood, but they all share different substance. They are different concepts. So in regards to humans, our accidents are the things that make us up. Not just our flesh, our blood, and our bones, but even our immaterial makeup of mind, soul, and spirit. Whereas our substance is our humanness, the thing that makes us distinct and separate from all other beings. So for example, angels, they are spirits, and they have minds. I don't know about bodies and stuff, but they have minds and they're spirits. They share those same accidents with humans, but there is some difference between a human and an angel. Likewise, an animal. Animals have, flesh, blood, bones. They even have a mind, and according to scripture, animals have a soul and a spirit. So they have the same accidents as humans, but there's still this difference between something being a human and something not being a human. So that's the difference between an accident and a substance. Strigel said that original sin was an accident and it only affected our accidents, our body, our flesh. And that meant that our human substance was still perfect and able to contribute to salvation. Flacius, in his overreaction, said that the very human substance was original sin. And this leads to a bunch of errors which we're going to get to. The Lutherans, as particularly Martin Luther taught that original sin corrupted not just our accidents, but even our very substance. That your birth, your nature, your entire essence is sin, that is sinful and impure. In his attempt to defend Luther's position, Flacius went too far, teaching that our very human substance was original sin, which would have some serious implications. Even though the fellow Ignacio Lutherans attempted to correct him, the best they could get was Flacius trying to make a distinction between the material substance and the formal substance of man, saying that only the formal substance, not the material substance, was corrupted by original sin. That didn't really fix the problem though. Still has the same issues. Now the formula rejects both Strigel and Victorinus. The formula rejects Strigel because even though the formula does teach that original sin is an accident, something that is not part of the very makeup of man, We reject the idea that original sin only affects our accidents. Instead, original sin affects even our very substance, corrupting everything. See, original sin corrupts us completely, not just every cell in our body, not just our soul, our mind, our heart, our spirit, but even our nature and substance is corrupted by original sin. However, we reject the idea of Flacius that original sin, that our substance is original sin. Instead, we make a distinction between the substance and original sin. We speak of original sin as a disease that may corrupt our substance, but there is a distinction between the substance and the disease. And so the formula rejects on one side the Pelagians or the semi-Pelagians like Strigel, and the Manichaeans or semi-Manichaeans like Flacian. So in regards to the Pelagians, the Sola Declaration gives 7 condemnations, though this is simplified to 6 in the epitome. Firstly, we reject those like Pelagius, who see original sin as merely the inherited guilt or punishment of Adam's fall and not as a corruption of humanity. So we reject the Pelagian error. We reject the Roman Catholics who teach the original sin as not being sin itself, but merely an inclination or a desire to sin. For example, Rome teaches that homosexual thoughts and homosexual acts are sin, but the orientation is not. This is contrary to the teachings confessed in the Augsburg Confession, Article 2, where we state that the same innate disease and original sin is truly sin itself. 3, we reject those like Pelagius who taught that original sin does not completely and fully corrupt humanity, but that the human nature remains good and pure and able to love God. This was taught by the Roman Catholics at the Council of Trent, which we reject. 4, we reject those like Strigel who said that original sin was just a stain on the human nature and it didn't corrupt us, so it could kind of be wiped off. 5, we reject those like Strigel who said original sin was merely an obstacle that made it impossible to keep God's law, but that we could still contribute to salvations in some ways. And 6, we reject those like Strigel who taught that original sin does not wholly corrupt us, but only makes us weak and makes it harder for us to be saved. All these views are rejected contrary to Genesis 6:5 and 8:21, which says that man is wholly corrupted from youth. When we also consider Psalm 51:5, we know that we are sinful from the point of conception. Now, in regards to the Flacian error, or the semi-Manichaean error, we reject 3 points. 1, we reject those like Flacius who held that the human nature and original sin were mixed together in an inseparable new nature, like how poison mixed with water makes the whole glass poisonous. This is rejected because it means that original sin and human nature are no longer distinct, and in this view, original sin is no longer just a disease that infects humanity, but it is the human nature itself. Secondly, we reject those like Mani who taught that original sin was something alien to man, so that God's law does not accuse the sinner but original sin. In other words, Mani taught that man doesn't sin because we are seduced into sin. Man sins because, our sinful nature just unconsciously sins. As if, man is just like a mindless puppet and original sin is doing all the sinning, whereas we don't. This is kind of an extreme view of Paul's statement where Paul says, I keep on doing the evil I don't want to do and I can't do the good that I want to do. Mani's saying, it's not Paul sinning, it's the sinful nature that's sinning. So we reject that as well. Man actually does commit the sin. We also reject the view of Flacius that held that original sin without any distinction is the very substance and nature of man. Now, in regards to Flacian's view, the formula goes into 4 areas where Flacian's view affects Christian doctrine, and therefore it's very important that we reject the Flacian view. So, regarding creation, we teach that God is not only the creator of humanity before the fall, but even after the fall. Job 10:11 says that God has clothed me with skin and flesh and knit me together with bone and sinew. And in Psalm 139 verse 14, David praises God because he has fearfully and wonderfully made us. The formula states that the very substance of human nature is created by God. And if this nature was sinful, then God would be the author and creator of sin. Either that, or we'd have to say that after the fall, it is not God who creates us, but the devil who creates us, such as Flacius, who said that man is made in the image of Satan. The formula teaches that it is God who makes us, Satan who corrupts Adam. The formula teaches that God makes us, Satan corrupted Adam, and Adam then bequeaths this original sin to us. Therefore, the formula explains that man is sinful from conception, not because God creates us as sinful, but that God takes this corrupted, fallen, sinful nature that we've inherited from our parents and shapes that into the new human. It's not that God makes a sinful person, it's that God makes a person using sinful material. Thus, God does not create sin, he creates beings who contain sin. Secondly, in regard to redemption, Scripture teaches in Hebrews 2:17 that Jesus became like us in every respect, and as Hebrews 4:15 adds, except without sin. He did this in order to redeem humanity. However, if we follow the Flacian view that the very substance of the human nature is sin, then either Jesus had original sin or he had to have a human nature that wasn't ours. This was taught by Johannes Saliger and Heinrich Fredlin, who held that Christ's flesh was of a different species. That is, Christ had a human nature, but he had a different human nature, different to that of, us. This creates a lot of theological problems. 3. In regards to sanctification, Scripture says in 1 John 1:9 that Christ cleanses us of all unrighteousness. This is even than that, so that even though both actual and original sin cling to us in this life, we are forgiven, and when we are received into glory, we leave them behind. We don't take original sin with us. However, if original sin is the very substance of man, then it would continue with us forever. And while Flacius did not address this issue directly himself, his followers did hold to the position that original sin is with us forever, and that is baptized, sanctified, and saved. So that when man is in the new heavens and the new earth, he retains original sin in a new sanctified version. So in other words, we would still have original sin with us. This idea earned the Flacians the moniker of being the new Manichaeans. And lastly, in regards to resurrection, Scripture teaches, particularly in 1 Corinthians 15, that on the last day we are raised in body and soul to live in the new heavens and the new earth. If original sin is the very substance of the human nature, then either man's flesh would not rise, as many taught, or as the Flacians taught, we would rise, but that we would have to have original sin with us in the new heavens and the new earth in life everlasting. The formula rejects both the views of Strigel and Flacian. We reject the idea that only our accidents and not our substance is corrupted by original sin, but we reject Flacian's extreme view that the very substance of humanity is original sin. Instead, the formula states that original sin is an indescribable impairment and a corruption of the human nature so deep that nothing pure and good remains in it or in any of its intentional or external powers, or internal or external powers. Instead, all is so deeply corrupted because of this original sin that human beings are truly spiritually dead in God's sight, having died with all their powers to the good. And that's the lecture on the formula on original sin. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.